It was 10 a.m. on an ordinary Tuesday morning in my brick townhouse in the historic South End of Boston, Massachusetts. My name is Margaret Louise Carter. I'm 72 years old. And that morning, I was watering the petunias on the little patio my late husband, George, built with his own hands 30 years ago. The sunlight poured gently through the old stained glass window panes, and the smell of fresh brewed coffee still lingered in the air, mingling with the faint perfume of honeysuckle climbing the red brick walls. I wore the same floral robe I always do, the blue one with white roses that my granddaughter Emily gave me 2 Christmases ago. My wrinkled hands held the green plastic watering can steady while I hummed You Are My Sunshine, the song George used to whistle when he laid every single brick of this house. Then the doorbell rang. 2 long, insistent chimes, the kind that don't ask, they demand. I opened the heavy oak door, painted navy blue because George once said it kept away jealousy, and there stood my oldest son, David, 45, dressed in a dark gray suit with black leather shoes that clacked against the porch tiles, his face wearing that impatient look he'd perfected during years as an executive at a Boston real estate firm. Without so much as a hello, he scanned me from head to toe and sneered, "That robe again, Mom? Don't you ever bother to take care of yourself?" His words stabbed me like ice picks in the chest. No good morning, no how are you, only criticism, as usual. But this time, he wasn't alone. A young man with slicked back hair, a tight white shirt, navy tie, and a shiny leather briefcase followed him inside like a shadow. His shoes gleamed as if they'd never touched real dirt. His manicured mustache sat perfectly trimmed, and his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, looked at me not as a human being, but as an obstacle to be bulldozed. "Mom, this is Jason. He's from the legal firm of Porter and White," David announced as the man extended a clammy hand that I barely touched. Jason slid a stack of papers across my table like it was some casual errand. "It's just a formality," David muttered while scrolling his phone, not even looking at me. "You only need to sign here, here, and here. We already talked about this, remember?" My fingers trembled as I took the papers. They smelled like fresh ink from one of those fancy office printers. Without my glasses, the words blurred, but I could make out enough. Transfer, authorization, power of attorney. My heart thudded hard. "Talked about what?" I asked, my voice rising. "The sale of this house, Mom. You can't live here alone anymore. It's too much for you. Not safe," David replied, his tone dripping with annoyance as though my confusion were just an inconvenience. His words landed like boulders. Selling my house. My house. The house where I raised 3 children, where I buried my husband's memory in every corner, where every photograph and scratch on the wooden floor held a piece of my soul. "Sell this house? Without my permission?" I whispered, the watering can slipping from my grasp and clattering onto the hardwood. "You already did months ago," David shot back with that fake smile. I suddenly realized I'd seen him practice in boardrooms. "The day we took you to Dr. Harris, the neurologist. You were so confused you didn't even realize you signed." My blood ran cold. I knew I hadn't signed anything, but Jason, the lawyer, pulled a manila folder from his briefcase and slid a sheet toward me with a practiced smirk. "See here, Mrs. Carter, your signature, dated 6 months ago." I stared at the paper. My name, Margaret L. Carter, written in shaky, childlike scrawl, but it wasn't mine. I had written love letters to George for decades, filled school notebooks for my kids with perfect cursive, signed every pension check with the same steady hand. This was forged, a clumsy imitation. "This isn't mine," I snapped, locking eyes with David, praying for even a flicker of the boy I once carried in my arms when he was feverish, the boy I encouraged when everyone said he'd never amount to anything. The man I sacrificed my last dollars for so he could start his business. But there was no guilt in his eyes, only stone. "Oh, Mom, please," he scoffed. "Stop embarrassing yourself in front of a professional." My knees shook, not from fear, but from rage and heartbreak. How dare he? How dare my own son call me senile, confuse my dignity with weakness, reduce my years of sacrifice into a target for profit? Jason tapped the paper with his pen, urging me to sign again for my own good. David crossed his arms, his voice rising. "You cry about everything. You play the victim. You fake being forgetful when it's convenient. Everyone's sick of your act." His words hit me like slaps. "Victim," he called me. "Victim." For staying up nights waiting for his calls, for limping through arthritis so no one would worry, for sitting alone every Sunday waiting for visits that never came. My throat burned as I realized the son before me wasn't my David anymore. He was a cold shadow, seeing me not as a mother, but as a barrier between him and a fat paycheck. And in that moment, surrounded by furniture George and I had bought one piece at a time, photographs of a family I thought was real, and memories carved into these walls, I understood the brutal truth. They didn't just want my house. They wanted to erase me. I stood frozen in my own living room, the watering can still dripping on the hardwood, my son and that so-called lawyer sitting smugly on the couch George and I had saved 3 years to buy, the same couch where George used to fall asleep watching the Red Sox games with a beer in hand. Every object in that room was a piece of my life. And now I saw Jason's eyes flicking across it all, assessing, calculating, like a vulture measuring the weight of a carcass. "Mom, the house is falling apart," David pressed on, softening his voice but lacing it with poison. "The roof leaks, the pipes are ancient, the stairs creak, it's no place for you anymore. We can get you into a beautiful senior residence with nurses, activities, people your age. You'll be so much happier." My jaw trembled, but I held my ground. "This house is my home. George built it. You grew up here. You took your first steps in that hallway. I bandaged your knees when you crashed your bike in that yard. And now you want to throw it all away?" For a fleeting second, I thought I saw something stir in his eyes, a flicker of guilt. But it vanished as quickly as it came. "Exactly," he said coldly. "Because you're stuck in the past. Dad's gone, Mom. He's been gone for a decade. We've moved on. You need to let go." His words were acid, eating through the fragile shell of my memories. Jason leaned forward, tapping the pages with his pen like a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. "Mrs. Carter, this is simple. Sign here, here, and here. We'll take care of the paperwork. You won't have to worry about a thing." Don't worry? How could I not worry when they were asking me to sign away my very existence, to trade a life's worth of sacrifice for a sterile room in some facility where strangers would decide when I ate, when I slept, when I died? My chest burned, but I forced my voice steady. "This isn't freedom. This is prison." David sighed, exasperated, running a hand over his slick hair like a CEO tired of a difficult client. "Mom, please, don't make this harder. You're not thinking clearly. Yesterday, Emily told me you were outside talking to the plants again, laughing to yourself. Do you think that's normal?" My knees wobbled, not from his accusation, but from the betrayal. Talking to my garden, to the roses and petunias George planted with me, was the only thing that kept me sane on nights when the silence crushed my chest. To him, that was insanity. To me, it was survival. My heart cracked, not from fear, but from the realization that my son had rehearsed this moment. He'd brought a lawyer, chosen a Tuesday morning when he knew I'd be alone, armed himself with false concern and forged documents, and cornered me like prey. He wanted to erase me, to cash out my history, and call it compassion. I swallowed hard and whispered, "George built this house for us. He told me it would be our fortress against the world, and now his own son is trying to tear it down? Jason cleared his throat, checked his watch, and spoke with rehearsed indifference. Ma'am, let's move this along. We don't have all day. The audacity of it, an outsider in my home, treating me like a nuisance. David leaned in, his voice sharp now. Stop being dramatic, Mom. Just sign. Everyone else is on board. If you don't, we'll have no choice but to take legal action and prove you're not competent anymore. My blood ran to ice. Legal action? Declaring me incompetent? My own son threatening to strip me not only of my home, but of my mind, my dignity, my very name? I stared at him, this man I had carried in my womb, rocked to sleep, defended against school bullies, funded through college when George and I skipped meals to pay tuition. And now he stood here, willing to declare me insane just to pocket the value of this house. I didn't cry, didn't scream. Instead, I felt a strange calm wash over me, cold as ice, but sharp as steel. Without a word, I told them I needed the bathroom and walked slowly up the creaking stairs George had built decades ago. Each groan of the wood was like a funeral march, but not for me, for the mother they thought I was. I locked the bedroom door, sat on the bed I'd shared with George for 25 years, and pressed my hands to my chest, my heart pounding with rage, grief, and a new kind of determination I hadn't felt in years. They thought they had cornered me, but they were wrong. They had awakened something else, something they weren't prepared for. Upstairs, behind the locked bedroom door, I leaned against the familiar wooden frame and let the weight of the betrayal sink into my bones. But instead of crumbling, I felt a heat rising in my chest, like fire catching in dry timber, and I knew I had to fight. I crossed the room to the old cedar chest where I'd kept George's things, his letters, his pay stubs from the construction jobs, the original deed to this house, and pulled out the battered shoebox wrapped in floral paper that had guarded my most important documents for decades. Inside lay every scrap of proof that this house was mine, ours, built brick by brick through sweat, sacrifice, and love. I found the yellow deed with both our names on it, the will George had written leaving everything to me, the receipts for lumber and nails, even photographs of him laying the foundation while I stood in the yard, pregnant with David, waving at the camera. These were not just papers, they were weapons, shields of truth against the lies my son was wielding downstairs. My hands shook, not with fear, but with fury, as I remembered the day they took me to Dr. Harris, the neurologist. David had insisted on sitting in the exam room, telling the doctor that I was forgetful, confused, unstable. At the time, I had felt cornered, humiliated, but now I saw the plan clearly. It was all groundwork for this very moment, a staged narrative to strip me of credibility. I pulled out my old leather notebook, the one George had given me when he told me to keep track of every expense on the house so we'd never forget the price of our dream. Page after page, written in my neat cursive. June 14th, 1982, $125 for shingles. July 2nd, $78 for copper pipes. August 10th, $50 for paint. Every number was a memory of the sacrifices we'd made. Me sewing until midnight for extra money, George working double shifts until his knuckles bled. All so we could give our children stability. And now, that very child was scheming to sell it from under me. I heard their voices drifting up the staircase, David chuckling with Jason, dismissing me as dramatic and predictable, as if they already owned the deed, as if my existence were a temporary obstacle. Rage boiled in my chest, but alongside it, something steadier bloomed. Clarity. I set the documents in a black folder, tucked the notebook inside, and slid it beneath my mattress. Then I picked up the old cassette recorder George had left me, one of those relics David always mocked as useless, and I pressed record. In a trembling but steady voice, I documented everything. The date, the hour, the names, their words, their threats, the forged signature. October 12th, 10:30 a.m., my son David arrived with lawyer Jason Porter, attempting to coerce me into signing over my property, produced false documents, claimed I had signed in March, threatened to pursue legal action to have me declared incompetent. My words filled the tape like a declaration of war. At that very moment, the floorboards creaked. Footsteps ascended the staircase. David's voice, sharp and impatient, pierced the air. "Mom, stop the nonsense and come back down. Jason's busy. You're wasting everyone's time." I shoved the recorder and documents back under the mattress, took one long look in the mirror at the woman staring back, her eyes harder than before, her jaw set like stone, and whispered to her reflection, "You are not weak. You are not done. You are preparing for battle." When I unlocked the door and walked down the stairs, each step groaning beneath my feet, I no longer felt like a cornered old woman. I felt like a soldier. And when I reached the bottom, I saw them lounging on my couch as if they already owned it, and I knew they had no idea the war they had just started. That night, sleep wouldn't come, not with my son's threats echoing through my skull and Jason's smug face burned into my memory. So I lay awake in the dark until nearly 3 in the morning when I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. The low mechanical whir of the old printer in the office downstairs, a machine that hadn't been plugged into a computer in years, sputtering to life on its own. My heart pounded as I slipped into my slippers and crept down the hallway, every creak of the floorboards like a gunshot in the silence, until I reached the office where George's handmade desk sat gathering dust. And there it was, the printer spitting out a single page, its green light blinking in the darkness as though some unseen hand had woken it from the grave. I reached for the warm sheet of paper, and when I read it, my knees nearly gave way. Preliminary agreement of sale, property of Margaret L. Carter, 142 Beacon Street, Boston, Massachusetts. Buyer, Jason Porter. Transaction value, $480,000. My full name, my exact address, and at the bottom, a handwritten note in a script I knew as well as my own because I had seen it on birthday cards and checks for years. Jason, as agreed, once she signs tomorrow, my commission will be $60,000. Wire me half up front. David. My hands trembled, my breath came in ragged gasps, but what I felt wasn't weakness. It was rage so sharp it burned away every trace of doubt. They weren't just selling my house, they were selling it to each other for pennies on the dollar, conspiring to cheat me and split the profits like common thieves. And David, my son, my flesh and blood, was pocketing a commission on my life's work? I stumbled back into the hallway and looked up at the framed photograph of George in his work boots, smiling in front of the house the day we laid the final brick, and I whispered, "Was it you? Did you send me this? Are you watching over me?" No answer came, but the air felt heavy, almost protective, like George was there, reminding me I wasn't alone. Clutching the document, I marched back upstairs, slipped it into my black folder alongside the deed and receipts, and sat on the edge of the bed staring into the darkness until a decision crystallized. In the morning, I would not wait for them to return with their pens and lies. I would take this folder to someone who still believed in justice. I remembered an old friend of George's, Daniel Whitaker, an attorney he had worked with years ago during a dispute at the construction site. Solid, honest, the kind of man who believed in handshakes and honor. He had promised George once, "If Margaret ever needs help, I'll be there." At dawn, I called his office, my voice cracking but steady enough to say, "Daniel, this is Margaret, George's widow. My son is trying to steal my home with forged papers. I need your help." There was a pause, heavy but full of resolve, and then his deep voice came through. "Bring everything you've got, Margaret. Bring it right now. This isn't just betrayal, it's fraud, and I won't let them get away with it." For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something stronger than fear. I felt power flicker back to life inside me, as if George himself had passed me the torch. By the time David and Jason rang the doorbell the next morning, at exactly 10, punctual as vultures circling a carcass, I was ready, sitting in my living room with a pot of chamomile tea steaming on the table, 2 porcelain cups laid out like I was hosting honored guests instead of thieves, and the black folder with my documents placed neatly beside me like a silent weapon. I had already spent an hour at Daniel Whitaker's law office, signing a formal complaint for fraud and forgery, granting him power of attorney to represent me, and filing for immediate protective measures on the property. So I knew the law was now on my side. Still, as the bell echoed, my heart raced, not from fear, but from anticipation. When I opened the navy blue door, David kissed my cheek with lips colder than ice and muttered, "Morning, Mom. Are you finally ready to be reasonable?" Jason followed with that polished smile, clutching his briefcase like a knight holding a sword, certain of victory. "Let's just get this done quickly, Mrs. Carter," he said, already pulling out the fraudulent documents. I gestured for them to sit, pouring tea as if nothing were wrong. "Please, have some. I thought we should make this a civilized occasion." They exchanged a puzzled look, but humored me, cups in hand, David impatiently tapping his fingers against his knee. "Mom, no more stalling. We need your signature." I leaned back, smiling in a way that made Jason's pen pause midair. "Of course. But before I sign, there are a few things I don't quite understand. Perhaps you can explain." From the black folder, I pulled the mysterious printout from the night before and laid it gently on the coffee table. The handwritten note gleamed like a blade under the morning sun. "Isn't it strange," I said softly, "that the buyer of my house just happens to be you, Jason? And stranger still that my son is set to receive a $60,000 commission?" The air thickened instantly. Jason went pale, David's jaw twitched. Where did you get that?" he stammered. I ignored him and slid out the official handwriting analysis Daniel had procured overnight. "Also curious, isn't it, that the signature on these supposed transfer papers doesn't match my handwriting? The report calls it a crude forgery." Jason's hands fumbled to gather his documents, but I slammed my palm on the table with a force that startled even me. "Don't bother. It's over. I've already filed with the courts, and Daniel Whitaker is handling everything. This house is legally protected, and both of you are under investigation for fraud and conspiracy." David's face turned crimson, veins bulging at his temples as he shot to his feet. "Mom, you've lost your mind. You think a washed-up lawyer is going to save you? You think you can fight me?" His words rattled the walls, but I stood too, matching his height with steel in my eyes. "No, David, I don't think, I know. Because unlike you, I have truth on my side. And unlike you, I don't stand alone. I have your father's memory, my granddaughter's love, and the law itself." Jason muttered something about leaving and stuffed his briefcase shut, retreating toward the door like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. But David remained, shaking with fury, his voice breaking. "You're going to regret this, Mom. Without us, you're nothing. You'll rot alone in this old house talking to your damn plants." My lips curved into a bitter smile as I opened the door wide. Better to die among my flowers than live one more day surrounded by snakes. Get out. And as the door slammed behind them, the silence that followed wasn't heavy or suffocating like before. It was holy, cleansing, a silence of victory. Sunday came with the weight of a storm, not in the sky, but in the air of my living room, where my children assembled like a tribunal ready to pass judgment on me. David in his immaculate suit, his wife Linda perched beside him with her permanent smirk of superiority, my middle son Mark, who had driven up from New Jersey with his polished suburban family man air, and my youngest, Robert, the one I had thought would stand by me, but who sat stiff and silent, refusing to meet my eyes. They didn't bring casseroles or coffee. They brought accusations. "Mom, we're worried about you," Robert began, his voice rehearsed, but already carrying David's fingerprints. David told us what happened," he continued, stumbling over his brother's name in a way that betrayed how scripted it all was. "You're acting irrational, refusing help, accusing your own son of theft." Irrational. There it was again, that weaponized word. My laugh escaped bitter and sharp. Defending my home is irrational. Calling out forgery is irrational. Mark slammed a hand on his knee, his voice booming like George's once had, but without an ounce of his father's warmth. You've always been dramatic, Mom. Always the victim. You never think about what's best for the family. Family. The word tasted rotten in my mouth. Linda leaned forward with her condescending smile. Margaret, with all due respect, at your age, confusion is normal. David only brought Jason to make things easier for you. He's not the enemy. You're just not seeing clearly. I opened my black folder, slid the damning document across the table, and watched the color drain from their faces. Is it confusion when I can prove your brother planned to sell my house for half its value and pocket a $60,000 commission? Is it confusion when a handwriting expert confirms my signature was forged? Silence blanketed the room, thick and suffocating. David jumped in, his voice cracking as he fought to keep control. It was for your own good, Mom. Jason was just going to help us flip the house, get you more money in the long run. Liar, I hissed, standing tall in the middle of the room. This paper doesn't mention flipping or helping. It mentions betrayal, greed, and blood that values money more than the woman who gave it life. Mark surged to his feet, looming over me, his eyes blazing. Enough! You're paranoid. If you won't agree to a residence, we'll petition the court to have you declared incompetent. It's for your own safety. Robert nodded weakly, shame flickering across his face, but not enough to stop him from aligning with his brothers. And that was the final crack, the moment the illusion of family shattered into dust. I straightened my back, my hands steady, my voice clear as glass. Do it. File your petition. Try to prove to a judge that a woman who raised 3 children alone after her husband's death, who paid for your schools, your weddings, your bailouts, is incapable. But hear me now. While you waste money on lawyers, I will be living in the house your father built, protected by the law and by the truth. And when the world sees you for what you are, leeches who tried to feed on their mother's flesh, you will be the ones declared unfit, not me. The room crackled with silence. Robert's eyes watered, Mark clenched his jaw, and David turned the color of ash. Finally, I walked to the door, threw it open, and pointed outside. You've lost a mother today, but I've found myself. Get out of my house. One by one, they filed past, some furious, some broken, but all stripped of their power. And when the door slammed shut, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt reborn. 6 months after I slammed the door on my sons, I sat on my sun-drenched patio, sipping hot coffee from a new blue ceramic mug I'd bought for myself, watching the petunias bloom brighter than ever, and realized my house didn't feel like a museum of grief anymore. It felt alive, just like me. I had painted the living room a soft sunflower yellow, replaced the heavy curtains with light linen that let sunshine spill through every window, filled the corners with orchids, ferns, and Emily's gift of a fiddle-leaf fig that stretched tall and proud, a mirror of the woman I was becoming. My days no longer revolved around waiting for phone calls that never came. Instead, they were packed with painting classes, cooking experiments, and walks through Boston Common, where strangers became friends. The court had already ruled in my favor. David and Jason pled guilty to fraud, escaped prison with probation, but carried records that would follow them forever, while my house was legally secured against any future theft. My other sons drifted away, muttering excuses, but I found I didn't miss them. I had already mourned the idea of sons I never truly had. What I gained was better: freedom, self-respect, and the unexpected joy of my granddaughter's companionship. Emily often stayed over, filling the house with music, laughter, and dreams of her own future. And one evening, as we cooked together, she asked, "Grandma, what's next for you?" I looked around at the bright kitchen, at the garden thriving outside, at the shelves now stacked with travel books and journals, and I smiled. "What's next?" I said. "Is the rest of my life, and for once, I get to decide how it's written." That night, I wrote myself a letter, not to my sons, not to anyone else, just to me. Dear Margaret, you are no longer the woman who begged for love from people who only saw you as a wallet. You are free, you are strong, and you will never again apologize for choosing yourself. I folded the letter, placed it in the black folder where the deeds and receipts once lived, and whispered to George's photograph on my nightstand. I made it, love. You built me a fortress, and I finally learned how to defend it. Then I turned off the light, lay down in my bed with clean sheets and a full heart, and drifted into the first peaceful sleep of my new life. Knowing that the story of Margaret Carter wasn't ending, it was only just beginning. 3 nights after I cast my sons out of the house, when the air still smelled of scorched bridges and freedom, the doorbell rang again. But this time, it wasn't the cold chime of vultures. It was tentative, almost pleading. When I opened the door, there stood Emily, my 22-year-old granddaughter. Her brown hair pulled into a loose braid, her suitcase at her feet, and tears shimmering in her eyes. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Dad told me not to come, said you were crazy, dangerous even. But I don't believe him. I needed to see you." I pulled her into my arms so tightly I thought I might crush her, but I couldn't let go. Not after weeks of poison, betrayal, and being told my blood was nothing but vipers. "My sweet girl," I murmured into her hair, "you're the only one who remembered I'm still human." That night, we cooked together, like we had when she was a little girl spending summers with me, chopping vegetables side by side, laughing at nothing, making chicken pot pie from scratch, while the house filled with the kind of warmth that hadn't been there in years. Over dinner, she told me everything. How her father raged about me embarrassing the family, how her uncles whispered that I was senile, how they planned to smear my name until no one in the neighborhood believed me. But Emily's eyes burned with something different. Fire. Loyalty. Truth. "They're wrong, Grandma. You're the strongest woman I know. You stood up to all of them and you didn't break. If that makes you crazy, then I want to be crazy too." Her words pierced through the armor I had built, not as a wound, but as healing, as if George himself were speaking through her, reminding me that love could still live in the ashes of betrayal. Later, as we sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, sipping cocoa while the Boston night hummed quietly around us, Emily asked a question that changed everything. "Grandma, have you ever done something just for yourself? Not for Dad, not for the family, not even for Grandpa. Just for you?" I opened my mouth and closed it again. 72 years of living, and I couldn't name one thing. My life had been survival, sacrifice, service. The realization cut deep, but Emily smiled and squeezed my hand. "Then it's time. You've already fought for your dignity. Now fight for your happiness. What do you want, Grandma? Where do you want to go? What do you want to try?" And for the first time in decades, I allowed myself to imagine not what others needed from me, but what I wanted. The possibilities stretched out before me like a sunrise I thought I'd never see again. And I whispered, "I think I want to live."